Today we're going over chapter 1.1 and the midpoint. Our learning target for today is I will understand the basics of geometry, including the midpoint. Our success criteria is I can find the midpoint of a segment using the midpoint formula. The formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So we're going to go over some vocabulary first, and the first thing we're going to talk about is the midpoint formula. And so I gave it to you in the success criteria, but let's break it down a little bit. So if x1 comma y1, these are little ones, and x2 comma y2 are the endpoints of a segment, then the midpoint is going to be taking the x1 from this point and adding the x2 from this point. So you take this one and this one, you'd add them together, and then you divide it by 2. And then this is a comma. And then for the second point, we would take the y1, we would add the y2, and we divide it by 2. So what that does is that's going to give us a midpoint point, essentially. So it's going to equal, we'll call it x3 comma y3. And what these sub numbers mean is just that this point is the first point, this is the second point, and this is the third point. So we're going to take the first point, the second point, we're going to put the numbers in those coordinate points where they belong in the formula, and then we're going to get out the third point, which is going to be the midpoint. We'll go through some examples of this in a second, but let's finish our vocabulary first. So the next vocabulary word is bisects. So to bisect something, bi means to, sect means cut. So it is cutting into two congruent parts. Now congruent means the same or equal. So congruent is equal in shape and size. Right, so congruent means same shape, same size. So the next word we have is collinear. Collinear, co means together, linear means a line, so it means on the same line. So together on the same line, collinear. So if you have two dots and they are on the same line, then they are collinear. They are on the same line. Next word is coplanar. Similar as collinear, so co meaning together, and then planar talking about a plane, so they are on the same plane. Now a plane is a flat surface, so think of like a piece of paper, and so if two things are on that piece of paper, they are on the same plane, and a plane goes on in every direction, so a piece of paper that went on outwards and this way, kind of like in a flat surface, but it goes on infinitely, if that makes sense. So it doesn't go up or down, it doesn't have depth to it, it is only two-dimensional. Okay, the next word, endpoint. So endpoints are at the end, or at the end of line segments. So let's see if I can get some examples. So let me actually do this real quick. So if we have a line and we have two dots, point A and point B are on the same line, they are collinear. If you think of like a plane, which they go on forever in the directions, let's say we have one here and a point here, those points A and B are on the same plane. And then endpoints, if we have a segment, A and B are endpoints because they are at the ends of the segments. They're the end of the segment that the line stops at an endpoint. If it kept going, it would not be an endpoint any longer because the line did not end. All right, so the next word we have is line segment. And a line segment consists, sorry, I was checking my spelling, of 2 points called endpoints with a line connecting them. So for example, what I drew up here is a line segment. And it would be written as CD with a line on top. Whereas a line, if you were going to denote that something is a line, you would have A, B, and you would have this on top. The next word is plane. Now, plane, which we talked about, is this. It is a flat surface that extends infinitely. And our last word is ray. And so a ray begins at a point and extends infinitely in one direction. So it begins at an end point, really. So a ray would look like this. So we'd have A, we'll say it starts at A, goes through B. So then to denote a ray, it would be A, B, and it would have a line with an arrow at one side of it. So this is how you would represent something that is a ray. So notice the symbols on top of the letters, they represent what type of line those things are. This one is a line that extends in both directions infinitely. This is a line segment, so it has endpoints. This is a ray, so it starts at a point and then goes in one direction infinitely. So now we're going to look at some examples to help us better understand how to find the midpoint. So this first example says, the map shows Zeba and Samir's houses on a coordinate grid. What's halfway between their houses? So the first thing we want to do is identify the points that these houses are at. So Zeba's house is 5 over. So it's at 5, out at 5, and up at 10. So 5, 10. Samir's house is -10 and down 5. So remember, it's always the X and then the Y. So So this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis. So you're always looking for this number first, and then the up-down number second. So if we were to draw a line between the two houses, where would we guess that the middle is near? So if you look at this, you can kind of see that the middle is probably around here somewhere. So if you were able to kind of eyeball it and kind of give a guess to where it's at, what might you guess? So notice that this goes by 5. So it's kind of halfway to 5 here and halfway to -5 here. So you may have guessed it, and you may have said, well, it looks like it's at -2.5 and up 2.5. So it'd be -2.5 and up 2.5. That would have been an excellent guess. Now, the way to validate if that is indeed the actual midpoint is to use the midpoint formula. So we wrote it down, but let's write it down again, because we like to repeat to remember. So x1 plus x2 divided by 2 for the first part of the point, and the second part of the point would be y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So now all we have to do is identify where the x1, x2, y1, and y2 are at, plug in those numbers, and do some simple math. So let's label Samir's house as the ones. So this will be x1, y1, because that's the first point. So those get the ones. Then this, remember, every point has an x and every point has a y. So this is x2, y2. So it didn't matter if you labeled these ones 1 and this one 2, you're going to get the same answer regardless. So just remember that the 1s go together and the 2s go together. This is the first point, this is the second point, okay? So now we're just going to fill in this formula here so that we can find what the answer is. So what I did is I said, okay, I know that I'm going to add 2 values and then divide them by 2 and add 2 more values divided by 2. So I'm setting it up right here. Now I just need to find those values. So instead of an x1, I need the number that represents the x1. So I go over here and I look, what did I label as my x1? So if you look, right here is our x1. So we labeled the -10 as our x1. So I'm going to put -10 right here. The next number we have is the x2 number. So we go and find what we labeled the x2 as. So under the 5, we said that's going to be our x2. So then we're going to put a 5 right here. Then we want to find the y1. So we do the same thing. Here's the y1. It's under the -5. So we're going to put a -5 right there. Then we're looking for our y2. So we go over here and say, well, my y2 is the 10. So we're going to put 10 right here. Now that we have these, we simply need to find the answer. So we just do a little bit of calculation, and we see that we're simply going to add the tops first, and then we'll divide them by 2. So here we have -10 plus 5. So -10 plus 5 is what? Hopefully you said -5. So now we have -5 over 2. Now here, what's -5 plus 10? Hopefully you said 5. So now we have 5 over 2. So now here we have these fractions as the points, and we want to compare it and say, well, is that what we wrote up here? Well, these are fractions and these are decimals. So how can we see if they match? Hopefully you realize we could just simply put them in a calculator and see if they come out to these decimals. So if you take -5 and a fraction is just division, so you just put division in your calculator, you'd say -5 divided by 2. And you could do this in your phone. So -5 divided by 2 is -2.5. Look at that, it looks good so far. So then 5 divided by 2 you put that in your calculator, which is on your phone, you'll get 2.5. So if you had guessed by just looking at this that the midpoint was negative 2.5 up 2.5, you would have been correct. And we proved that by using the midpoint formula. All right, so now we're going to look at another example about how to use the midpoint formula. So here it says a treasure is buried in a field halfway between a large rock and the tip of a pond. The tip of the pond is 250 feet east and 325 feet north of the rock. At what point should you dig for treasure? So what I like to do is I'm going to draw a visual for this because that way it will help me and I'm sure it'll help you as well. So first, a treasure is buried in the field halfway between a large rock and the tip of a pond. So I need to, 250 feet east and 325 feet north. I'm going to make myself a little compass in the corner. That way I know what directions I'm going. So never eat soggy waffles is how I remember it. You might have a different way. That's how I remember it. So now I'm saying, okay, the tip of the pond is 250 feet east, so it's going to be to the right, and 325 feet north, so that's up from the rock. So if I'm going right and up from the rock, then I'm going to put my rock right here. So that's my rock. Now I'm saying that from the rock, the tip of the pond is 250 feet east and 325 feet north of the rock. So 250 and 325. So then here, this is my pond. Okay. So the treasure is buried halfway between these points. So we need to figure out what the halfway point is. So we're saying, okay, from here, what's the halfway? That's what we want to find. So now the way to find it is simply to say, well, it's going to be halfway this direction and halfway this direction. So we simply need to divide each of these in half to find the halfway point. So notice I'm not going to travel the full 250 feet. I'm only going to travel half of that. Then I'm not going to travel the whole 325 feet up. I'm only going to travel half of that to get to the halfway point. So we simply take these numbers. So we have 250, divide it in half, and then we'll have 325, divide that in half. And that's going to get us our midpoint. So notice that we didn't have two coordinate points that we needed to add them and then divide by 2. We just had the full distance here. So essentially we were starting at this point where we already had added whatever they were. We had those numbers, we had the distance, and we're just going to divide it in half. So now when we calculate this out in our calculators, we get the midpoint. And so it's 125, 162.5. So what that means is the treasure is 125 feet east and 162.5 feet north of the rock, and that's where we would need to dig to find the treasure. Now let's talk about your assignment. You will go into Teams under Files, and you will click on Chapter 1 Worksheets. So Files, Chapter 1 worksheets, and you will do page 1 and 2. So in the Chapter 1 worksheets, there's going to be all the worksheets for Chapter 1. It's a PDF. You will do page 1 and 2, and you will do, so we'll say page 1, numbers 1 through 11, and page 2, you will do everything but number 6. So you'll do numbers 1 through 5 and 7 through 10. Okay, so you don't do 6. So this is your assignment, and then we'll hop on a call and I can help you through that, but get to work on it before our call. All right, see you soon.